present my screen. Okay, so you should be able to see yourselves on screen now. So we have 6 UMIPs. I'm going to propose taking them in reverse order. So starting with the SUSHI price identifiers and working up to the KPI options identifier, because that one's the most complex and it's got the most outstanding issues on it. Does that seem like a sensible approach?
Works for me.
Good, good. Okay. With the SUSHI price identifiers, this is UMIP 211. There's a couple of questions around the naming and the medianized price feed. I see you've left comments since I last looked at this, Sean. Is this effectively resolved?
Yeah, I think there's within the price identifier template, there's some instructions around the character length, but I don't know. I think we're trying to avoid using forward slashes whenever possible, and at least I don't personally see it as an issue, but yeah, I think like my one outstanding question here would be if we can, this would kind of be for Matt and Chris, if we could support this out of the box, support the xSUSHI price identifiers, because it requires basically determining how much sushi is locked in the xSUSHI contract to get the price of xSUSHI. And if we could support that from like a price feed standpoint.
Because it's a wrapper?
Yeah. Or I don't know.
Is it like a,
it's not really
is it like
a
a ratio?
Yeah, it's like a ratio.
So is it basically, if I understand correctly, the xSUSHI contract contains some sushi. That sushi just sits in the contract? Does it go anywhere else while you have it staked? Or does it just sit in the contract?
Just sits.
So we should be able to use this. We have this kind of generalized price feed that works for LP tokens that could be used, that would probably work, where we basically look at the issued tokens and we divide that by the number of like contained tokens. So for instance, if you had like a wrapper token, you would deposit one token A and then you would be issued token B. And you basically look at the ratio of token B to token A to determine like what the redemption value of token B is in terms of token A. So we could use the SUSHI price, multiply by that redemption ratio to basically get to do this out of the box, as long as that's exactly how it works. Now, it's really important that, like, for instance, in like Yearn strategies or Badger strategies, for instance, the tokens that you stake actually leave the contract and go do other things, right? You put them in other strategies, or they get sent around the DeFi universe. So this does not work for those sorts of things. It only works if the staked tokens stay in the contract, and they don't move while they're staked. But in that case, that would work.
Cool. So
we can do some
stay
research
in the contract. They do stay in the contract, and I think it follows that exact pattern. So
okay, cool.
So would that be an expression price feed? We would basically get the ratio and then multiply that by the SUSHI price from the other identifier?
Correct.
Yep.
Cool.
That's how it's written in the UMIP, as far as I see. Yeah. Do you want to look at it, or are you good?
Say that again. Sorry.
Do you want me to put it back up on the screen, the UMIP, or are you good?
I'm good. I think I should probably also try to define what that expression price, like the expression price config, would look like. Probably be useful.
I think so. I think in general, like if we can put the exact like expression in the UMIPs, it helps a lot with recreating exactly what's going on. So I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so it's good to go, but you might do some minor clarification, Sean. Yeah?
Yeah, I think just
Okay.
adding the default price feed config.
Cool. Excellent. So that one's a go. Possibly minor clarification. Looking at adding sushi as collateral currencies. I don't think there was really any issues with that. That all seemed good. Anybody want to raise anything?
Where's the final fee set?
The final fee. Let me go to the.
It's 25 for sushi, 22 for xSUSHI, because by design, xSUSHI will always be worth a certain amount more than sushi. So.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I mean, we probably don't need to do this now, but we should probably long term think a little bit. Well, we should probably just like, we might want to do an UMIP soon as a refresher on all the final fees, because the final fees are quite, I'm guessing at this point the prices have diverged a lot across different currencies. But I think 25 sushi is fine. Or 20 sushi is fine.
22 xSUSHI.
Yeah, the final fees are dramatically different across collaterals now. I mean, like the final fee for ETH is like one, or for WETH is one WETH, right? So it's kind of like ridiculously high, and even the Ren BTC is pretty high. So might be a good idea.
Maybe that's something to kind of consider, like as a whole, across all of the UMIPs at some point.
Yeah, we had this we have this process that we put in place a long time ago that we haven't really used in a while, but it's called like a UPP, an UMA parameter proposal. So we could actually change these. This is meant to be like a much shorter type of UMIP that we could kind of use. We'd still have to go through a vote and everything, but just you don't have to write as much. And we could use that to kind of wholesale go through and reset all these to a dollar value that we think is right. Because agreed, like WETH is way too high.
Okay, but I mean, it's a bigger issue than just this, and this is basically good to go with no changes.
Yep.
Yeah,
I think so.
Excellent. The next one was UMIP 209, which is the upgraded V2 pIDs. The only one there was that I suggested that BTC got separated out just because there was so many dependencies on BTC, and that it would ease references, because I don't think very many people will reference the other price identifiers, but they will want to reference BTC. But we're happy just to have it all in a one?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just as a summary for this UMIP, it's simply we have an issue where there's old price identifiers that were used with non-18 decimal collateral currencies and are currently being used in live contracts. So like there's no change in the actual implementation for these things, which is why this UMIP is so simple. It's simply creating a new name for the price identifier and identifying that the price ID needs to be scaled to 18 decimals. And at least I don't see any difference between USD, BTC, and the rest of them, because they all like have live contracts and have dependencies. So I think we should just keep it as one.
So
when do these identifiers expire? Sorry, Barry. But when do these expire?
You mean when do the contracts expire?
Yeah, the ones that are currently using these identifiers. Like, are there any of them that are currently expired? Because, like, if it seems to me like ideally we don't want to have like USD BTC V1 and V2, like the goal in my mind should be to phase out like any variance in the naming. And like, let's say ideally all of these are already expired. We could just use an upgrade UMIP that just redefines the definition of the UMIPs to specify the scaling without having to like have duplicate names. So what matters then really is which ones are still being used, because those are the ones like obviously USD BTC, we have like the yield dollar that runs until the end of the month, and like a lot of these stable spreads I think expire at the end of this month. But do all of them like terminate at the end of March, or are there any that are more long running than that?
Yeah, I think Ample USD is the only one that's more long running than that. But also, if we waited for the contracts to expire, then that does have like other effects, right? Then we can't do like an efficient rollover of USD BTC. Correct, yeah. And stuff like that.
Yeah, it just in my mind, it would be like the ideal outcome is to not end up having duplicate identifiers, even if we end up deprecating them. So if there was a way where we could upgrade and then deprecate, that doesn't end up like the canonical version being the V2, that would be ideal, I think. But
could we say that there's two like kind of weird solutions we could do here. One solution we have is like at our disposal is like we could try something with dates. So like we say if a price request is for a date that comes after, like for after time t, then it uses the scaling, and before time t it uses a different scaling. So that way we could like do a more efficient rollover potentially. I guess that doesn't work perfectly because you still could have like liquidation and disputes earlier, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe there are solutions like that where we schedule a change, like kind of like a hard fork or something.
Yeah. Just the V2 feels like a bit janky as like a legacy solution, right? Because it's just like to patch something that like, 2 months from now, it's like use BTC V2, but it's only BTC has the V2. So it just feels a little bit clunky. So I kind of think if we can err on the side of a hard fork like Matt suggested, that would be better.
Just how would that like work? I mean, couldn't we potentially run into issues during that like 2 weeks of overlap or whatever?
I think the only real issue we could have is if there are two requests from two different contracts at the same timestamp, that one uses the one scaling and the other uses the other scaling. Under pretty much all other circumstances, we should be able to scale the price feed that we put in according to the calling contract. So this might require some like a little bit of effort in the voter DApp until these contracts expire. So basically, like if a price request happens, we would need to manually just like double check who's the calling, like who requested it and what scaling are they expecting, and then make sure that the price request that the voters scale by is according to that decimals.
I don't think that works because you can engineer that. Like you can engineer a situation, like a malicious person could like engineer that sort of situation so that they could like attack the system by forcing two requests at the exact same time by two different contracts that need to scale. Well. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, ideally that's what we would do, but I just think the attack surface is too big. Yeah. I don't have a great solution here. I mean, I agree. I totally agree with you, Chris, that like that V2 is like really clunky, and and you introduce it and then you can't go back, right? Like you introduce it and then everybody's gonna start using V2, and then like now you have this V2 thing hanging around like long after this old BTC identifier is dead, and we would have to do another migration to move it back, which would be annoying. So it's not clear but it's not clear if we can do like a nice rollover between the two. Maybe we could create this V2 identifier and say that like immediately deprecate it and say we're only going to use it for this one contract, and the idea is that we shouldn't use it otherwise. I don't know.
that might be the option, right? And we only simply add, it would be USD BTC V2. None of the others, I mean, I guess others might want to also roll. So any contract that wants to roll, you do that. But then the requirement is then anything following the roll moves back to the old identifier, and then we update the spec once all those contracts are expired. And then once the V2s are done, we then deprecate. It's a bit of it's like a few extra steps, but it probably ends up being cleaner in the long run.
Yeah. So it seems like the V2 thing is a go. We just might need to change some language around how we expect it to be used. Would you all agree with that?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So just to summarize, we're going to try to use the V2 identifiers for any contracts that want to roll, but that should be the only time they're ever used.
Or any contracts that want to expire before we can deprecate the V2, right? So in like the interim, while there's like this transition period, they should use that. But yeah, so I think that amounts to pretty much only people that would want to roll.
Okay,
Yeah.
and you'll put in a few edits around that, Sean, into that contract?
So just one additional note here, like I don't think it only applies to people that want to roll. Like some people are trying to launch long dated USD BTC contracts now, like BTC backed yield dollars now. And so I guess we could, I mean, I don't know what the right course of action there is. Just wait until the USD BTC one has expired and then launch with the original price identifier. Or yeah, I guess.
Ideally, yes, but that's a bit of a pain. It's like 15 days wait.
I mean, in the worst case scenario, they just launch with V2, and then we have two identifiers that basically do the same thing, USD BTC and V2. And then like anybody that launches after should be using USD BTC.
I think that's fine. And then we can eventually deprecate it. I think the main thing for me is I don't want V2 to become the canonical version. So if it's a stopgap in the interim and then eventually we remove it, that's fine. Yeah, so I think what you said is okay.
Okay.
Okay, so the V2s are going to be temporary.
Yeah. And maybe we shouldn't call it V2. Maybe we should call it something else. Because V2 makes it sound like it's like the new standard.
Any suggestions? I was struggling to come up with names.
Like 18 decimal scaled or something. It's a bit long, but it's like more explicit as to what it is.
It's fair.
Have we
V18.
deprecated the old EMP factories?
No.
Okay, cool. Just checking, because they could, in theory, still need to be used if you use those old factories.
Yeah. My bigger worry is that people are going to launch with the 8 decimal scaled ones accidentally, because I think USD BTC is like the obvious identifier to use.
Okay, maybe have some thinking on that, but it's essentially go. We just need to kind of organize things.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else anybody wants to raise in that one?
Nope.
Good. Our next one was the DPI and INDEX price identifiers. As far as I know, these are basically good to go. No, that's the collateral one, sorry. And that's KPI. There we go. Okay. Yep. That's everything is resolved as far as I see, unless anybody.
The one thing
So-
that Sean raised here is around, there's a pool specified, I think, that has more than 2 tokens in it. It's a balancer pool with 4 tokens in it. Now, I think our balancer feeds might work with this. Initially, I didn't think it would, but after looking at it a bit more closely, I think they might. As long as the input and output tokens are specified correctly, being like the base and the denominated currencies. And then the main reason is like the way those feeds work is they actually use the balancer get spots sans fees method, which considers like non-standard weightings and multiple assets in the pool. So I think it should work, but we do need to double check that like 100%. There might need to be some changes made to it before it'll work 100%.
So you think it would also work with the non-standard weightings, not just the, because
so.
there was also a balancer pool that was like 70-30.
Yeah, so we should probably validate both of those assumptions independently, but I do think it should work.
I think the non-standard weighting should work. The price sans fee thing, do you tell it the other token to price in terms of in the price sans fee call?
Yeah, so you say that it's an that you specify the input token and the output token when you call that method, I believe.
Okay, that probably works then.
I think that should also be specified within the UMIP implementation though, because I don't think it's immediately obvious how to do that. If you just say like, get the price from this balancer pool.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not as like even numerically just working it out, the spot price is not as simple as just like a 50-50 weighted pool. So probably a good idea to specify that.
Okay, so the outcome is basically a go, but you need to check the 4 token balancer pool.
Yeah, and non-standard weighted pools.
Into the, oh, sorry, 4 token balancer pool and the
non-standard weighting. So like non-50-50 pools.
I mean, I think the non-standard weighting is a subset of the multi-token or like more than 2 token, right?
Yeah.
I could see it like behaving weirdly though in either scenario, but yeah, you are right. Like by definition, if you have more than 2 tokens, it's not 50-50.
It's 50-50.
And write it more explicitly into the implementation section. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for both of those balancer pools. Also, there's just a few other. Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, like, is that like putting whether or not it works aside, like, is that a component of the feed like strictly necessary? So that's for DPI, but there's also like 2 other DEX feeds. There's like DPI ETH on SUSHI swap and on Uniswap provided. Like, what is the volume in the balancer pool with those 4 assets? It's like WETH and WBTC and CUSD. Like, my intuition says it'll probably be much smaller than the DPI ETH on Uni and SUSHI. Like, it might be simpler to just remove that feed if it's like negligible compared to the other 2.
This is in the markets and waiting.
Just in terms of the volume on that pool versus the other 2 DEXs.
Right. Okay.
So if I remember correctly, like I think the volume on all of them except for Uniswap is pretty small. So I think like the more pools we can have, the better, because like SUSHI Swap's volume is like super small. It's like, I don't know, 40K average per day or something like that.
Okay, cool. And also, I mean, it's obviously better to spread across 3 exchanges. So I guess it is strictly better if it does work.
Okay. So that's good after I check with the 4 token balancer pool and the non-standard weighting, and it's written more explicitly into the implementation.
Yeah, I think there's also some other like cleanup things, like saying these should be rounded to 18 decimals, which seems pretty, I don't know, seems unnecessary to me. Yeah, I think that was it, but.
Okay, so check the rounding as well. Okay. The next one is DPI and INDEX as collateral. There we go. I didn't see any issues in that, but I think you've reviewed things since, but there's nothing outstanding there. Are we good to go in the DPI and INDEX?
I think so. The final fees check out as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Final fee is like 414 for 24 index and 466 for 1 DPI.
Yep.
That seems quite reasonable.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so that one's just a straight go. That was easy. Okay, and now to the KPI UTVL one. There's actually quite a lot outstanding on this. First of all, I wrote this one, and I wrote it with every single ERC20 token was kind of mapped to its previous UMIP where it existed, and almost all of them did have. Sean pointed out that it wasn't really necessary to do that, and I could just say, look at the UMIP. But I kind of kept BTC and ETH separate. Should we not?
So I think my suggestion was just around like, because if we try to define how to get the price for every single collateral currency from like existing UMIPs, it's not going to work, right?
Mhm.
Because like theoretically, I mean, that could work and maybe that's the right course of action, but also theoretically there will be new collaterals added that won't be encompassed within like explicit instructions in this UMIP. So my suggestion was more around just defining like a few sets of rules and like how to price things based upon like the type of token that it was.
Yeah, that seems so much more sensible, because otherwise it becomes a bit self-referential where we have to update this all the time. I did keep BTC separate because there was two different BTC. There's WBTC and REN BTC that are both approved. And I kept the WETH the same as well. And assuming that dollar stable coins actually were worth $1. So we're good with that. There's questions around the depreciation of UMIP 7. Is that covered okay? It was in the rationale. Because this one refers to UMIP 7, but UMIP 7 is getting depreciated.
I mean, I don't think that should matter too much. Like, as long as
Okay.
there's like a heuristic around scaling to the dollar, like we no longer need to consider like a lot of scaling issues with this. As long as it's dollar denominated and scaled to the collateral, it should be fine.
Cool. Excellent. There was questions around how to treat BWBTC ETH underscore SLP. It's basically a SUSHI swap token. And Anu left a couple of comments, but they seemed contradictory. And I didn't really know how to resolve it, because he suggested just lumping it together with the other liquidity tokens in UMIP 39, which I did. But then later on, he's pointed out some problems with that approach and suggested that we just treat it as a normal ERC20 token, as in follow the UMIP. Anyone got any thoughts on that?
So wait, what are the two suggestions? He's saying that
The There is a specific UMIP for this SUSHI swap liquidity token, UMIP 39, which tells you how to calculate a dollar value. Yeah. There's also another one, which is all the Uniswap ones, which is 59, which tells you how to calculate Uniswap liquidity tokens. There is no dollar feed for this, so we can't just say, you know, take a price from CoinMarketCap or wherever. So we need to actually like define a process. The question is whether we should follow the process of UMIP 59, which is specific to this SUSHI swap token, or whether we should follow the UMIP 39. No, 39 is the specific one, or 59, which is a more generic one for all Uniswap liquidity tokens.
I see. Interesting.
The question is, if we get additional SUSHI swap liquidity tokens added as collateral, then if we follow up UMIP 59, we can just calculate them all that way. Whereas with otherwise, we would be using additional calculations, one per each liquidity token.
I think 59 also conforms to like pretty much how the LP token feed that we already have works. So from like actual settlement perspective, when it comes to calculating the TVL, that will require like the least effort from our side, I think, and it's already generalized. So I think that probably makes the most sense. I mean, it literally amounts to just like looking at the redeemable tokens within the LP, like how much collateral is each LP token worth, and then how much is the sum of those two, like in dollars. So I think 59 makes the most sense, is to follow that pattern, seeing that it's pretty generalized already and it follows our current feeds implementation.
Okay, that seems good if everyone's happy with it.
Yeah, I have another kind of broader question about this. How are we handling the idea that like more collateral currencies, let's say collateral currency A gets added, you know, in a month, and then the TVL, there's like $1 million of TVL from that collateral currency. Are we going to amend this UMIP as we go? Or is the idea that like there's some general way to calculate the value of all these collateral currencies?
Under Sean's suggestion, it was rewritten so that if there is an existing UMIP, you follow the UMIP. If there is no existing UMIP, then you just take the 3 highest markets. Was it the 3 highest markets, or was it just the highest market?
I mean, I didn't really define anything specific, but
okay.
So,
but basically, if there is a price feed, you follow the price feed. If there's no price feed, you simply query a dollar exchange to find the dollar price of it. That works, assuming it's not a fancy token, like a liquidity token or some kind of bizarre token. So, you know, you have to assume that there is actually a dollar price for this. If not, you would have to create an UMIP to define the dollar price.
Yeah, I think we might want to add a caveat there that like I think that would cover a lot of cases where you say if the token is like heavily traded on like centralized and decentralized exchanges, you can just take the top 3 markets. If it's not heavily traded, or if its primary use, and this is kind of subjective, but if its primary use is more as a token that is redeemed for other tokens, like an LP token or like a like xSUSHI or something, then you would actually like compute the redemption value and then get the price of the thing it's redeemed for. So I think there's like some subjectivity there, but I think like there's a whole class of tokens that are redeemable for a more for a token that has like more volume. And I think we should like separate that out from the tokens that trade on their own.
One thing I'm wondering, is it possible, like for future price IDs, required that they include dollar denomination additionally, just or it's not possible to ensure that, because that would definitely ease this situation, and we would not to like invent anything new, and it this price would be already calculated in the UMIP.
It's a good point.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think for the vast majority of UMIPs, we already have the dollar ones. Like, even if that wasn't the use case intended, we like always would just throw in the USD of that identifier. But I agree though, like as a rule, we should follow that pattern.
But specifically, it would have to be with the collateral currencies that we add. It doesn't actually have to be
Right.
for every price ID. So,
Correct.
but I think like making that a requirement for new collateral currencies, that they also, that if there's not a dollar denominated price UMIP, then we make sure to add, or sorry, if there's not a dollar denominated price in our set of identifiers, then we ensure to add that along with the collateral currency. I think that's reasonable.
We also have like collateral types that don't specifically have price identifiers for that collateral type, like Ren BTC or Ren Doge or RDI or DI or whatever. Yeah, so, but I think we can define like some rules around those that would make that not a problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, but I think that's not the problem, because every new contract requires price ID. If it's just collateral, then it's not used. It's not part of total value locked anyways.
Yeah, that's a good point for the most part, right? Like people use Ren Doge or Ren BTC without like a Ren BTC price ID, but you just need to define that there's like something that's used in place of that, right? Something it's like directly replaceable for Ren BTC.
Yeah, we use like BTC USD instead of Ren BTC USD, which is like kind of a bad, not a perfect assumption, but yeah. But
also, that's a good point, because like we don't need to worry about Ren Doge, because Ren Doge isn't being used by anything, because there's no price identifier associated with the collateral type.
It's fair, yeah. Although it technically could be used, right?
It could.
Like you could use the Ren Doge as collateral for like ETH USD if you really, for the price ID ETH USD if you wanted to create a weird product. But that's typically not what we see, so I think we're fine making that assumption.
Yeah, and you'd still be using Ren Doge USD, right? So if we define some sort of rule for collateral currencies where it's like if there's no collateral over USD price ID, then just use like the three highest volume markets or something like that, then it's fine.
Yeah.
I think I only had the one. I'm just trying to check to see whether I had one market for dollar value or not. Because I suggested just getting it off CoinGecko, I think, which isn't terribly great, but it doesn't have to be entirely precise, or does it?
I think it's settlement. It should be as close as possible.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So we want
CoinGecko
to
is
average.
notoriously. Oh, sorry. Please go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a bit notorious. So we probably want to average the price across different exchanges.
Yeah, probably medianize, I would say.
Medianize.
So like the simplest rule would be like take the top like highest 3 volume exchanges, ignoring some like with a whitelist of exchanges. Like we don't want wash trading, and then take the median of the top 3 and something like that as a very basic heuristic is probably like maps to 80 or 90% of our previous UMIPs in spirit, and we'll get as close as damn it to the actual number.
Okay.
Also, like in combination with that, just saying like use whatever price identifier already exists for that collateral type if it exists. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's already written into it. It's just for ones that don't have a price identifier already. Okay.
So the one thing, yeah, exactly. It's like a catch-all for the ones that don't have identifiers. Can we talk about the TWAP issue and like the risk of manipulating this identifier? Because like I think the way it's spec now, it doesn't really have like any TWAPs considered. And in my mind, like we should ideally have like at least like a day's TWAP, if not longer. I mean, if it's really short-lived, it's probably fine, but instantaneous prices are like super easy to manipulate, right? Like you could, in theory, flash loan and deposit like literally at the snapshot moment. Like, I don't know, it's not trivial to do, but you know, the point is it's easily manipulatable. So, and you don't need to manipulate all of the collaterals. You would just need to manipulate one thing that's included in the calculation, and it would skew the entire TVL. So given that, like, it's obviously not super trivial to add TWAPs to all the feeds, especially if we're not using pre-made feeds. But in my mind, it's almost a requirement given the implications of manipulating this price feed and sort of how seemingly easy it is to do, that you can just use one collateral type and manipulate the whole system.
Most of the contracts that refer to, most of the collateral types that have a price identifier have TWAPs kind of written into the calculation of the collateral value. I think more of a danger is potentially somebody putting in masses of collateral instantaneously. So we want some kind of TWAP across a period in advance, across all the collateral types. Yeah? Or did
I think so, but I think the thing is though, like if you like, I don't know necessarily if this is vulnerable to like a flash loan, because we consider like the price at the end of a block, right? Not like intra-block prices. So you can't really like do anything too nasty with that. I would more just be worried about someone like just depositing a huge amount of collateral, like even if it's over a TWAP window, right? Like if it's 2 hours, like it could still be manipulated, right? Like you just like deposit a huge amount of collateral for 2 hours and pull it out. So kind of what I was suggesting was like dragging the TWAP to be longer than that to like make the actual like TVL contribution more meaningful. And maybe this is unnecessary and overblown, but it just seems like someone who received a lot of KPI options might want to do this kind of manipulation. Like maybe taking on the price risk is not worth it, but I don't know. It seems easily messed with.
So, I mean, I think it's a really tricky question. So I totally agree with the perspective that somebody could like, that a whale, nobody's going to receive enough. I mean, in the way the airdrop is set up, I don't think anybody's going to receive enough of these TVL options to where like they would have enough, the cost of capital would be worth it for them. However, I can imagine someone buying up a bunch of these TVL options with plans to manipulate it. I think even a day TWAP, like if you have enough capital invested in this thing, like it's worth it to you to do a day TWAP. But I agree with you, like the shorter the TWAP, the easier it is. So kind of that it's worse. So I think a day TWAP could totally make sense. I think actually we need to rely a little bit on the fact that the voters should use their subjective judgment to like determine if they feel like this has been manipulated. And if it has been manipulated, they kind of ignore the portion they ignore the price movement they think was manipulated, right? If they think that it started being manipulated a day, if the TWAP is 1 day and they see the price jump, just before 1 day, like an hour before that TWAP starts, before settlement, then maybe the voters should like basically just take the price before then, take the price at a little over a day before. So I think we're gonna have to put in a clause that's like maybe a little bit more that like acknowledges that manipulation is possible here, and that the voters should try to like take that into account when voting. But I still agree with you, Chris. I think a longer TWAP makes sense. Yeah.
I think the problem with relying on voter honesty, though, is that, you know, UMA holders have a vested interest in the TVL being as high as possible because they're the ones that got the KPI options. So, I mean, yes, but, you know, there's differing incentives here. There are kind of alternative incentives to keeping it honest and straight. Yeah.
I mean, I think UMA voters who are large enough to have an impact on the vote are probably more concerned about making sure the system looks reliable and secure and like it's not being manipulated, and also probably interested in not giving out more tokens than necessary, right, to the TVL options holders, right? Not giving out more than these people are actually entitled to. So I think the large voters would actually be definitely on the side of like, be on the conservative side here of trying to make sure this is done fairly and honestly, to make sure that the integrity of the system is kept up. Otherwise, you might see your, you know, if you own 1 million UMA tokens, you might see the value of your 1 billion UMA tokens go down because it was clearly manipulated and the system didn't resolve it correctly.
There would also be the difficulty of actually getting a price that everyone could agree with. Suppose, you know, a load of collateral came in 5 minutes before the end, then, you know, but it kind of, well, suppose a load of collateral came in the last day. At what point do you say, well, that was the TVL?
I mean, I think it's just up to voter discretion, and we kind of have that by default with like all price IDs, right?
But in general, you have this is how you calculate this. And you follow the steps, and everyone theoretically should get the same answer. Whereas with this, if you follow the steps, you come to a manipulated answer. We want you to guess what the right answer is. Everyone is going to calculate in slightly different ways. No two people, supposing everyone calculates it on their own, no two people are going to come up with the same value.
Yeah, unless you have a defined start for when to start looking from. Like if we don't explicitly define 1 day TWAP, like star up to voter discretion, like by definition, there's gonna be divergence in those numbers.
But I think the idea that the voters should be able to calculate the correct price independently is like not necessarily true, right? I think we actually, the UMA Oracle relies on the fact that voters can collude, right? Voters are supposed to talk to each other and figure out and come to a consensus about what they think the right answer is, rather than relying on everyone running some sort of secret computation on their own and sending the votes on chain and hoping that it matches everybody else's. I mean, it's not a secret ballot, or it is a secret ballot, but you're allowed to talk about what you're gonna vote beforehand.
Colluded shelling game. I love it.
Yeah, and we do this, right? We do this on most votes, right? Like Sean posts an answer, and sometimes we debate it, and sometimes people disagree with Sean's answer. Sometimes they
like Rainus.
don't.
Sorry.
Rainus just calls me out for my stupidity all the time.
But no, I think that's how it's supposed to work, right? I don't think it works otherwise, because like these these setups have gotten so complicated that there's ambiguity in these price IDs now. There's just like undeniable ambiguity in how these things are calculated, right? Like across the board. It's almost impossible to get the exact same answer as someone else. And so like if you're just following the UMIP. So I think collusion is required and necessary.
Okay.
I agree.
I do think, though, that we need some kind of guidance. So the guidance would go in the rationale
Um,
or in
what are the sections?
implementation.
I might say implementation.
Yeah, I think we have pretty.
Back up on the screen.
I think we have pretty general language that's used in a lot of implementation sections around, you know, identifying that this is the actual like true value and using discretion in your votes if you don't think it is.
Mm-hmm. So you don't think we need additional guidance?
So yeah, I think there's some existing language in other UMIPs that I can point you towards, Bari.
Okay, so I'll just lift that and put it back in. I mean, I did mention this in the security considerations, but I just kind of noted it without any advice. So maybe in here would be the most appropriate place. Yeah?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
I mean, the language you use elsewhere is this is the way you calculate the value, unless that differs from broad market consensus, and broad market consensus is how we like kind of define this sort of voter discretion, I think. But yeah, Sean, as Sean said, like it should be in other UMIPs. And we can even make it make the language stronger for this UMIP because we think there's like a higher risk of manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Sounds good.
So
okay, there was two other. Go on.
I was just going to bring up one other outstanding question here: is which contracts do we actually include? Like, should we only be including EMPs and perpetuals? Should we include like any type of registered contract and like any type of registered contract in the future, or what do we think?
I think it should be anything that can perform a price request. So any registered contract should be included. So that includes all the Java stuff, any variant that might come later down the line that doesn't form like the normal pattern, it's still insured by the DBM, and therefore it's still part of the total value locked. So in my mind, it should be every financial contract linked to the governor, and that has permissioning to make price requests.
Gotcha. That makes sense. But not contracts that are only interacting with Optimistic Oracle.
I mean, I think that's interesting, but I think they should still be considered. I think they can, by extension, make a price request to the DVM. So they're still like fully secured part of the TVL.
I think the main problem with those is, and maybe something that would get figured out, is those are harder. It's harder to figure out who quote unquote depends on the Optimistic Oracle and what collateral is depending on it, because it's not a registered contract, and you could have a contract out there in the world that technically has a reference to the Optimistic Oracle and will request it at some point in the future if it needs to settle, but like we have no way of knowing about it, right? You literally have to scan every contract on Ethereum to find to figure out if they depend on the Optimistic Oracle. So I'm actually, during this period of time, I'm not convinced there's going to be a like high TVL usage of the Optimistic Oracle, and I think I'm worried it might be like a black hole for us to try to figure out how to actually find these contracts or include them in the calculation. But I'm open to suggestions.
That's a good point. Like actually figuring out who is dependent on it is not as straightforward.
I mean, we could do something as simple as like saying, if you have made a request to the Optimistic Oracle, then you're included. And if you have not, then you're not included. I mean, that's a rough heuristic, but.
So I think that's probably sufficient for now. I mean, like you said, I don't think it's going to necessarily blow up directly. And those that are dependent on the optimistic oracle are likely to also be included in the TVL calculation from the DVM. So like perpetuals, for example, like they're still going to fall under the DVM registered financial contracts. So, you know, in most cases, unless they're just using the optimistic oracle, they'll probably be caught by the DVM computation anyways.
Yeah, and the optimistic oracle is meant as trial use. It's meant if you're not registered and not paying fees, you should be using it kind of in a trial manner. And once you're kind of not using it as a trial anymore, and you're using it kind of more fully, we should be kind of pretty aware of the project and aware of how to find the contracts. So we can amend the UMIP at that point if we need to, I think.
What should we do about pending fees? Are fees that are not yet claimed by the governor still considered part of the TVL? And the reason I ask is because the way fees are structured right now is that if we impose a regular fee, the collateral is like docked from the contract and is like technically owned by the governor until those fees are claimed. So like, is that considered part of TVL? Like, I don't think we need to worry about it too much because we're not really charging regular fees, but between now and settlement, it could become a thing.
Sorry. Are you saying fees like? Are you saying like before the fees are sent to the store, or are you saying the fees sitting in the store waiting on being withdrawn?
So I was referring to the former, but I guess we should consider the fees in the store as well. But yeah, I was specifically referring to fees that haven't yet been sent to the store.
Right. I mean, I think that's going to be fairly small. So I think for the purposes I think for now, like it's fair to assume that if the money is in the contract, it's part of TVL, and if it's not in the contract and it's already been sent to the store, it's not. And I think that's like a reasonable assumption. Yeah. If yeah, I think that's just like the simplest way to do it for now. Unless y'all see some like better way to handle it. We could say that technically it's correct to not include those fees, the pending fees, but like, but yeah, I just don't think it'll make that big of a difference. I don't know. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, it's like a fraction of a percent. I mean, it's if that, right? I don't even think it would be measurable. Like the fluctuation between blocks in like ETH price will probably be larger than the impact this would have.
Yeah, exactly.
Could I just go back a little to the query all relevant contracts bit? I just more or less copied and pasted what Sean and Nick suggested because I really don't know what the technicalities are of this. If there are going to be other bits added in, can someone rewrite that section?
Yep, I can help you with that, Larry.
Excellent. Cool. Okay. So we've got the identification of the contracts relying on the optimistic oracle. The last issue was Rains brought up rogue liquidation attacks.
Yeah, it was more like a hypothetical question because definitely there is no economic benefit other than just to disturb this motivation system and this spirit of KPI options. So I don't know how much capital you would really need to distort it significantly so that we have to worry about it.
Okay, in case you haven't seen it, this is Rain's comment here.
Yes, but basically it comes from the situation which we had in the yield dollars where there were rogue like liquidation and the sponsor like was having losses just because the price of collateral in relation to synthetic increased in value. And here I just imagine situation when this price being TVL is going higher and then falling back, and in that case if I understand correctly, some part of UMA would be stuck in the contract, or I'm not quite sure how that's possible to get it out in that scenario if somebody actively tries to burn money on this.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about this. This is something we've been thinking a lot about. So basically, I think what you're kind of getting at is like putting an option in an EMP is really weird, right? Like it's not built to handle options exactly. And so like, how do you structure the payouts and stuff so that I mean, I think even like without the liquidation gain, like you have other questions around like, well, I think it's not even obvious that like liquidators can't make money by liquidating positions, right, in this contract, even if the positions are correctly collateralized. So so yeah, I think that the idea, and we're still trying to figure this out internally, or we're still talking about this a bunch in the design of some of these options. But like basically, what we want to do is have you can have these options be fully collateralized. You can have like the first position be fully collateralized and make the withdrawal liveness really long, and also make the liquidation liveness really, really long, basically past expiry, so that withdrawals and liquidations are basically not feasible and impossible to do on the contract at all. So you don't need a bot to monitor it. You actually don't need any sort of monitoring at all. And that only works if the position, if the sponsor is guaranteed to start, if the first sponsor basically sets up their position at fully collateralized so that they have the max payout of the option already in the contract. So if they do that, and I'm not sure that this is how it will be structured, but if you do that, then liquidations are unnecessary. And so then you have the question of like, well, how do you keep people from liquidating? How do you make sure that liquidators aren't profitable? And so what you can do is make sure that the penalty for someone liquidating, sending an invalid liquidation, is actually like 99% or 100%. So the liquidator, basically, if they tried to do that, would lose not just like they wouldn't just get a penalty, they would lose all of their money. So if you combine that set of parameters in the EMP, you can actually, I think, and I'm not 100% sure, so would absolutely love your feedback on this, but I think you can combine those sets of parameters to make it so that liquidations, like rogue liquidations, are never profitable, and they won't cause any sort of weirdness, like weird like collateral getting stuck in the contract or anything like that. But yeah, would definitely appreciate feedback on that.
Yes, I definitely think that it's not going to be it's going to be unprofitable for rogue liquidators. But just wondering whether their purpose is different. Like they just want to spend money on this and trying to disturb the situation. Do we worry about that scenario, or that's fine with us if somebody is just throwing money on the system with intent to disturb the outcome?
So you're saying they would liquidate the TVL options contract?
Yes. Like if somebody tries to attempt, and then that's of course disputed, and the liquidator of course loses the money on this, but the outcome of the KPI options might be disturbed slightly.
Oh, I see. You're saying somebody would initiate. You're talking about something different. I see. You're talking about like somebody initiating liquidations to pull money out of the system, basically to force positions to be closed. Is that what you're getting at? Like you would
yes,
do this to change the outcome of the TVL option.
Yes, like just calling liquidation directly on this KPI options contract. To like somebody claiming that actually this TVL is 3, while everybody knows that it can go more than 2.
I see. Yeah. So it wouldn't. I think this is a really good point, actually. You left a comment about this. Let me respond to your comment on GitHub, because I need to think about it a little bit more. But I can give you a kind of a stronger response.
All right.
The basic idea, I think, is that you should actually not the price while the contract is active should actually just be the max price. It shouldn't be the current. It shouldn't be like the current price. It should be the max price. So then the liquidations are always invalid, and you're always liquidating like a huge loss. But
Yeah.
I'll try to articulate that better as a response to your comment.
All right.
I think that's actually in the financial libraries now, right? Like that it like seals the output always be it, like no matter even if it was valid or invalid, like it always goes to 1 for the price. So it's bounded, and like all liquidations will therefore be invalid.
Yeah.
So even in that scenario, like, but it is a good question though around like what happens to those options like post liquidation. Like we should still have the liquidation timeout to be something that is still like settlable post settlement, right? Like we don't want it to be like 1,000 years into the future, because the sponsor still needs to get back the liquidated collateral. And I think that's like in particular what you're touching on. Like you don't want that to get stuck.
Right. But then if you dispute it, that timer falls off. Like as long as it gets disputed, you're fine, because you don't have to wait till the end.
Yeah.
So as long as as long as you can
final-
ensure every liquidation is profitably disputable, and then people you can make it 1,000 years, and someone will always dispute it. That's or at least that's the idea.
And as long as the final fee is sufficiently high, then all the other guarantees we have around like DDoS protection are valid. So it's not like this is unique in any way.
Yeah. I actually have to.
Okay, so we can basically sort that kind of behind the scenes. But in terms of the UMIP, sorry, Matt?
I was just saying,
Yeah,
I think me and Chris have a meeting, so we actually have to go.
Yeah, but I think from my side, other than that alteration and the addition of the TWAP, it's fine. It's good to go.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good. I've got minor issues medianizing the median price across 3 volume exchanges, add the extended guidance for voter discretion and identification of contracts reliant on the optimistic oracle. But apart from that, it's good to go.
Yep.
Sounds good. Awesome.
All right. See y'all.
Cool. Well,
Cheers,
thanks
guys.
for sticking with us for a little bit over time. But
No
yeah, that's very good.
Cool. Bye,
All right,
guys.
bye.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.